Giggs. Giggs. No. Rhodri.
Is there anything that Lionel Messi is better than you at? It's opinions. I respect your opinions. Maybe in your opinion Messi is better than me, but in my mind I'm better than him.
I do it again. Add it up, bankroll, euro, peso, add it up. I'm just doing me, everything is on me. Oh, you matter what? Add it up, bankroll, euro, peso, add it up. I'm just doing me, everything is on me. Oh, you matter what? Told her if it's all me, everything is on me. Gon' back it up. Matter what? Told you I'ma do me. Why you hating on me? It's not adding up. I do roll like a Mack truck. Country heart, I might cop a farm and go act up. Like scars, I was cold-hearted, now I'm back up. Keep it real, I do this once a month. I don't rap much. I just hit the money and go stack up. Only buy cards and get tatted up. All that other bull, it don't matter much. You only climb me, I put the ladders up. No fault, I done doubled up on the workload. I think I fell in love with the bankroll. Pray up, get money, then we lay low. Add it up, bankroll, euro, peso, add it up. I'm just doing me, everything is on me. Oh, you matter what? Add it up,
Yes, guys, I'm Si. Welcome to our new spin-off show, Gigs with Guests. However, you will notice that there is no Giggs, but unfortunately, Rhodri's come down ill this afternoon, so I'm gonna have to pull his weight for him and do it myself, which I'm not. You know, it is what it is. But I'm delighted for this first edition of our spin-off show. It's a VAR special, and who better to speak about refereeing than former Premier League referee, Mr. Jeff Winter. How are you, my friend?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Better than VAR.
Yes, indeed. Well, there we are. There's a start for you straight away. It's, I mean, first of all, Jeff, I kind of want to talk about what we thought VAR was going to be. Obviously, VAR was brought in to kind of get rid of those wrong decisions, to make things better, use technology as the world has evolved and these things. But to me, at least, I feel like it hasn't made things better. And if anything, I would argue that the standard of refereeing on the pitch feels like it's got worse. But I'm interested more in what you kind of think in it from a general perspective. Like, do you think it's the implementation of it, or do you think it's just VAR as generally? Like, where do you stand on it as a whole?
Well, I don't know whether you're allowed to swear on your programme. I find it very, very difficult to express my emotions about VAR without swearing, because to me, it's fucked up the game that I love. And I am a former referee. I'm a football fan now. I've gone back to my roots. I watch as much football as most people, more than most. And when I'm at a non-league game, I can go back to enjoying football. When I'm at an SPL game or an EPL game, or when it's used spasmodically in certain rounds on certain grounds in the cup, or for finals of the playoffs, you know, the hand pick, new rules, because it's, you know, we played football one way all season long. Now we'll use VAR in the playoff final. So you can probably get the gist that I'm not the biggest fan. And I just think, the ironic thing is, it doesn't seem to work very well in England. It doesn't seem to work very well in Scotland. But with the odd obvious occasion, it seems to work in the Euros, the European Cup, the Champions League, the Nations League, the Conference League. So it just seems that domestically is where we can't get it right. But taking your words, I thought all those years ago when the pundits screamed out that referees were losing managers their jobs and we needed something else involved, in my autobiography in 2006, I include a page in there where, I'm not trying to be big and clever now, where you could foresee anybody that had been on a football pitch as a match official could foresee the problems that would lie ahead. But not even in my wildest dreams did I think they'd start tweaking what's a handball and isn't a handball 2 or 3 times a season. And when you go to a game as a fan, I can't imagine what it's like for the players or the management. But as a fan, you just stand or sit there, you know, like a spare prick at a wedding. What is going on? And I thought it was brought in or was going to be brought in as used. And I think the vast majority of people thought it was to correct obvious errors. And the one I always quote is the infamous Thierry Henry handball for France that meant the Republic didn't go to a World Cup. No blame to the match officials because it was 60 yards and 2 goalposts away from the assistant referee. It was deviously done on the blind side of the referee, but TV, with all its remote different angles, could see it was an error. So let's correct things like that. Now, it's not being used for that. We never hear of that type of incident because they happened once in a blue moon. What we see every game is the game, and I'm sick of hearing people come out with the comments, it is not there to re-referee the game. Bollocks. That's exactly what they are doing. They're re-refereeing the game. Someone else is making under more pressure perhaps than a referee, because the referee sees it with his own eyes and goes penalty, handball, whatever. Now you've got people looking for mistakes. And, you know, I don't know how long your program is. I can rant on for the next half hour. And I'm talking as someone that used to be out there and knew the pressures and knew what you gave and what you could see and couldn't see. I see my former colleagues now looking like rabbits in the headlights, looking confused. And I think they're under more pressure now than we were in the good old bad old days when you just did your job. We've got referees now who don't make decisions. And why would they? Why should they? Because there's the fallback of somebody telling them, and they're not. How many times do we see a ref go across to the screen and have the courage to stick to his original decision? So, you know, the match referee isn't the man in the middle. The match referee is the man sat in a room at this infamous Stockley Park. So you might gather I'm not the happiest side.
No. So a couple of things which straight away, it all pricks my interest, but a couple of things straight away. One of the things which I said, it must have been 18 months ago now, maybe even longer than that, was straight away where you've got FA Cup games or League Cup games where it's not used at certain grounds. So to me, you can't have a tournament of any kind where teams are playing each other, but they're not playing under the same rules and circumstances. That's madness.
100%. So, when I know they're talking about scrapping FA Cup replays, but a couple of seasons ago, my hometown team, Middlesbrough, we went to Tottenham, and the game at Tottenham had VAR. The game at Middlesbrough didn't. And like I say, we've now got the playoff finals that we're in the midst of, where teams in League Division 2, League Division 1, the Championship, have played all season long, and they've got to the final. And now, all of a sudden, if we said at Wembley we're going to make the goals 2 foot higher and 1 foot wider, you'd say you can't do that. You're not changing the rules. It's the same game. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. And that might be a stupid analogy, but when we see what's happening with VAR, let's get one thing straight. It's not going away. I think everybody knows. I know there's supposedly this vote coming up. It's not going away, but it needs to be managed better. All VAR seems to be doing now is deny the players, the management, and more importantly, the fans, the enjoyment. I was at a game 10 days ago. Well, I'll tell you the story of the weekend. On the Saturday, I'd been to see my local non-league team, Stockton Town, play. 90 minutes, playoff final, draw, thrilling game, extra time, penalty shootout. Everybody, for good reasons and bad, were on the edge of the seats, loving every minute of it. The following day, I travelled to Scotland to watch Rangers play Kilmarnock. After 22 minutes, the ball had been out of play for VAR checks for nearly 8 minutes. The first one came after 2 minutes. The last one, before the 22 minutes, when the game restarted, it was one of these, was he offside, wasn't he offside? If he was, we know how we're restarting the game, indirect free kick to the defence. If he wasn't offside, it was a penalty to Rangers and the sending off of an opponent. By the time this farce had been completed, and I'd driven 200 miles to watch this game, I turned around to my partner and I said, I could go home now. I don't give a shit whether he scores the penalty or not. I've lost interest. Now, we've heard the jokes that if you put a pair of size 8s on instead of a pair of size 9s, that could mean that, yes, your feet would hurt a bit, but you might score a goal or it might be allowed. We're talking about toenails. If that's what VAR was aimed for, then we've all been conned. It's just annoying, frustrating. And at the end of the day, to use that well-used football term, somebody somewhere has got to make a decision. And if you get 100 football fans neutral, if there is such a thing, watching an incident in a game of football, you're never, ever going to get 100 saying it was a penalty and nobody saying it wasn't. There's always going to be a split vote. So we're never, ever going to have a situation where everybody agrees. Why not just let the referee do what referees have done since football began and make a decision? And then if there is a Thierry Henry incident, then let's have a look at it. Now, every single goal is checked. And worryingly, I can quote another game I was at a few weeks ago where the referee, he was wrong. He'd made a mistake. He didn't award a free kick in one half of the field of play. And the free kick should have gone against the defenders in that half of the field. The game continued, 9-10 seconds to the other end of the field. There's a cross into the penalty area. It's half cleared, goes back in. The home team score a goal. Then VAR gets involved. And we came back 60, 70 yards, 12, 15 seconds earlier, and the goal was ruled out. Now, the purist will say, well, that was correct. There should have been a free kick awarded. That team shouldn't have been in possession. But if that's football now, and if that's not re-refereeing the game, I'm sorry, I don't know what is. And you might think the team that got the penalty in the game I was talking about before was the team I was supporting. In this other game, the team that scored the goal that was disallowed was the team I was supporting. So one decision went for me, one decision went against me. Isn't that like football has always been?
Yeah.
Some decisions go for you, some don't. But, to have 50,000 people or 5,000 people in a stadium, clueless. The way you find out what's happening now when you're in a game, when there's VAR, is that you've got a mobile phone and your mates are sat at home either watching it on the television or watching it on the dodgy stick or watching it one way or another. And they are messaging the ground. They are sending stills. They are telling you it was a handball. It wasn't a handball. Because the people at home They're getting the slow motion action replays from every angle. They're getting the commentary telling them, and us mugs that have travelled, in some cases hundreds of miles, paid a hell of a lot of money to be in stadiums and watch the game. We're stood there not with a clue with what's going on. So it's so annoying, so frustrating.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it as well is like, I don't understand why football, or certainly British football, seems to have such trouble implementing it. You look at the way rugby league implemented it, cricket, the crowd always know what is happening. They tell you what the VAR checks for. They'll show it on the screen so the crowd is involved and they can see it as it's being reviewed. So, like you say, it's that you just stood around like using your words, a spare prick at a wedding, just waiting around. And I think it's really frustrating. And I think the other side of it is so much of these decisions are subjective to whoever's looking at it, that it becomes almost ridiculous. The amount of times this season in the Premier League, you'll have on a Saturday, you'll see one and there's a handball or a penalty and it's given. And then 24 hours later, you'll have a carbon copy in a different game with different refs, same technology, and it's not given. And if you're a football fan, if you go on like social media, every single fan base thinks that VAR has screwed them over this year, whereas every other fan base thinks certain teams have had the best of it. So I guess
hasn't that, Simon, that has always been the case.
Of course,
that was the case. So VAR is supposed to improve things. I would say if we wound back to pre-VAR and our match of the day pundits and Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville on a Monday night are talking about decisions, they've always done that and always will do that. I would say post VAR's introduction, we're spending more and more time. My former colleague, Dermot Gallagher, he does Ref Watch on a Monday morning on Sky Television. How many times this season have they had to extend the half-hour slot to an hour slot to talk about VAR decisions? So, yes, decisions in the main. This is why I said, like I mentioned in my autobiography 18 years ago, I said, football is different to rugby union, different to rugby league, cricket, tennis. All those games predominantly are stop-start games when a decision needs to be made. Is it a try? Isn't it a try? Is the ball in? Is the player ran out? All those things. You can make that decision at a natural stoppage in the game. Football doesn't have, in fluid play, natural stoppages. Appeal for a penalty, not given, play on. 10 seconds later, the ball's in the penalty box at the other end of the field of the play. And I just didn't think football could lend itself to those introductions. Goal line technology, the best thing that ever happened. People used to say everyone in the ground could see that was over the line. Goal line technology has proved that those people had too much to drink before the game, because you can't see everything. In fact, an assistant referee from 50 yards away with a ball driven in at 80, 90 miles an hour, and we're seeing a millimetre, wasn't a goal, was a goal scenario. The naked eye, I'm afraid, my eyes weren't the best of the best of times, but the naked eye cannot see that. So things like that, we've moved on. I think, the offside law, we're now game defenders won't agree with you on this, or me on this, but the game is about goals. It's about excitement. And, I think Arsene Wenger's supposedly making suggestions that, we revert back to what happened when I sat the exam to be a referee, and that to be daylight. Now, that gives the benefit of doubt to the attacker. Now, the most recent one that everyone was talking about was the Coventry City goal that was chalked out in the FA Cup against Man United. That, I mean, honestly, no allegiance to Coventry City in any way, shape or form, but I just feel for the fans, again, that had spent a fortune to go down to Wembley to watch that game. And, you know, they've got every right to feel cheated and robbed. But the people with the power, they're smug as anything, saying, well, the system proved that he was offside. But, you know, by a midgie's dick, is that what we're going to see? Full goals chalked out. And then when it comes to subjective decisions like a penalty, I mean, all right, I mean, the handball is a whole different thing now. I've seen some jokes awarded, you know, for handballs, as we all have. But the decision for a penalty is subjective.
Of course,
I can watch it on television half a dozen times myself. This isn't getting a panel of 100. I'll watch it half a dozen times, and I'll watch it from different angles. And 3 times out of 6, I'll say it was a penalty. And 3 times out of 6, well, that's not strictly true, because some of the time I'll say it was a penalty. Some of the time I'll say it wasn't a penalty. And the majority of the times I'll say I haven't got a clue, because, you know, the speed of the game, the players are so clever. Defenders get conned because attacker puts, you know, the weight on one leg and clicks into the defender rather than the defender tripping. Someone's got to make that decision. Why not, for the good of the game, it be the man in the middle? Because all the man in the middle, I don't know what he's doing. He's out there to toss a coin. Every other big decision has to be ratified by the VAR. And
do you know, as a championship fan, obviously Cardiff's my team, so that's who I watch every week. And to me, like, I'm almost petrified of getting promoted if we ever get back on, you know, get the behind the scenes thing sorted, because I look at the way, you know, I watch the Cardiff play and I enjoy it so much. Just what I grew up on is football, and I mean just the general football. As obviously there's other sides of modern football that maybe I don't like and stuff, but generally speaking, the actual game, you're just watching football, and then afterwards you can discuss whether the referee's been good or bad or indifferent, whatever. But when I look at these VAR games, and I, you know, like, what was it? I think it was Liverpool versus United. I can't remember if it was the league or the FA Cup. And Harvey Barnes sticks his leg out to make sure he has contact and gets a penalty. And then the next week, there was another game and someone else does exactly the same and it's not given. And to me, the biggest thing with all of these decisions as a neutral for the Premier League, really, is I would just like the decisions to be the same for everybody. So if they say, right, if it hits your arm from the elbow down, it's a handball regardless, then all right, I don't necessarily agree with that, but at least it's the same for everyone. Because at the moment, I would be, you know, some of these teams, they must be frustrated because they don't get a decision in one game, and then they watch their rivals get that decision the next day. And that's got to be infuriating.
Again, that has always happened, and perhaps always will happen, because we're talking about no 2 incidents are the same. I know there's a similar one.
It can be similar, yeah.
Last week, but no 2 incidents are the same. But the referee is a different referee. The assistant referees are different, you know, assistant referees. And you've got people of different abilities. You know, if you look at Cardiff City, have you got an Andy Campbell playing up front for you at the moment?
We haven't got anyone playing up front.
Well, there you go. So, do we judge Cardiff City on? I use Andy because he's a friend of mine and obviously lives close to where I live, and I know the hero status he still has with Cardiff City fans. But, you know, do we judge everything on Andy Campbell's ability, or do we judge everything on your current forwards who you say you haven't got any? Like refereeing, do you judge on people going back probably to before your time, the George Courtneys, the Keith Hackett's? Do you judge them on Howard Webb or do you judge them on a first season Premier League referee now? You can't, because players all have different skills and talents. Is it not common sense to say that referees, you're not going to get, but then again, I think this is what they want, and that's why they want VAR. They want robots. They want everybody to be the same. And the cry, we must have consistency, that's been there since long before I started refereeing. But it's being highlighted even more now. I think one of the problems with the match officials is that by the time you get to the highest level in England, you've got a long career of refereeing. You've started on the parks and gardens. You've moved up through non-league football. You've moved up through the lower divisions. You've got to the Premier League, and then it takes time to adjust both the players understanding and knowing you, and you understanding the pace and pressure of that game. So you've done your apprenticeship, you've got to the highest level, and then it seems as if every weekend something's happened. A handball's been given, a handball hasn't been given. There's a knee-jerk reaction, and all of a sudden from next week, lads, we're going to change. We're going to look at this. We're going to do that. So all the benefit of all that experience of getting you to the top of the profession is thrown out the window, because they keep chopping and changing interpretations. And it's almost as if, and I mean, don't forget, I sat in these meetings when we reviewed games after each weekend's fixtures. And, you know, if there'd been a major cock-up, you learn from mistakes. But it seems now as if the handball, I mean, honestly, Scotland, you've got to see some of the decisions that are there. You know, the ball is just literally hitting arms and elbows and a penalty's given. I don't think it's quite as bad as that in England, but it's bad enough. But, you know, the point I'm making is a little bit of sympathy for the match officials, because the benefit of their experience is being thrown out of the window because somebody in an office somewhere is saying we should do this, we should do that. And you can understand, I mean, there's this vote coming up, and I would be absolutely amazed, you know, for them to get the majority to scrap it. Because, you know, there's so much being invested in time and appointments, and it's working. I don't even know whether, you know, English clubs, if English clubs said we're not having VAR, they might not be allowed to compete in European competition, because you don't see any noises coming out of UEFA and FIFA saying they're going to scrap it, probably because their system's working a darn sight better. I mean, only last week we had 6 semi-final second legs in the European competitions, and across the 6 games, I know they were late at night, that some of the replays I saw, so I might have been falling asleep and forgotten some. But I can't imagine across the 6 games there was more than 3 or 4 occasions where they actually looked at VAR or made a meal of it. There's a goal scored, VAR is checking for whatever they're checking for, goal given. You know, you're talking about seconds. What we've got domestically is this farcical situations where, you know, I think probably the record's been 4 or 5 minutes. Now, great if you're at home, you can go and get yourself another beer or go and put a kettle on.
Yeah.
No good if you sat in a bloody stadium and you're on a tight schedule to get the last bus or the last train home. There's people having to leave the ground early. I mean, when you're looking at 10 minutes in each half, which is probably the worst case scenario, which does bring me, if we've got time, onto another subject. You know, if referees carried out the laws of the games and punished time wasting, encroachment, all those silly little things, then perhaps we wouldn't have so much time added on. And with all the time added on, is this why we're seeing a lot more injuries? Because players are you know, hot, moving, and then on a freezing cold night, they stood around for 3 or 4 minutes, and then they go into a sprint. So, you know, there's so many downsides. If everything in life, they always used to say to me, get a big sheet of paper, one side write the positives, the other side write the negatives. And I'm afraid, whilst there are some positives, my list for negatives far outweighs any benefits that we're getting out of it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Jeff, as you said right at the start, it's not going away anytime soon. In my personal, and I think they would probably be fan-wise the majority, but maybe I'm wrong. My personal preference would be goal line technology, yes, and then everything else leave to the referees and the assistant referees, and then have VAR there for like you said, like you used the Thierry Henry one, like something which is a clear issue or a clear cheating thing. You know, if it's just a bump or like a 50-50 on the halfway line, which has then led to a build-up and then a goal, then all right, you know, sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. That's the way it goes.
I agree with you entirely. The other way, perhaps, would be, and, you know, I think the referees feel under a lot of pressure. It's supposed to help them. But now there'll be someone, mark my words, there'll be someone with a list that will tell you the referees that have had decisions overturned or they've had to go up the screen and they got them wrong. The assistant referees who put the flag up and the slide line showed they got it wrong. There'll be a league. People say, "Oh, match officials are not accountable." Somebody will be looking at those mistakes, and they will be accountable. They'll be accountable the next week in what appointments they get. They'll be accountable come the end of the season when they might not have the contract renewed. How about the referee has, as you say, the Thierry Henry handball? Sorry to pick on Thierry Henry, but it was the most obvious, you know, error that happened in recent years. And people will say, well, there's been many, but as a percentage of decisions that are made in games of football, it's minuscule. But, you know, if somebody can hit a red flashing light and everyone in the stadium knows, most importantly, the referee, that there's a problem. Thierry Henry's you couldn't have seen it. He's handled the ball. But then other than that, what about the referee being the one who instigates the review? I'm not sure. You'll find, though, that people might, as they're doing now, bottle out of making decisions. But then again, the authorities, and when they're looking at who's going to get cup finals and who's going to get promotions, they base the referee in appointments and promotions on the best referees. And the best referees are the ones who control games and make the fewest of mistakes. But, you know, it wouldn't affect my pride or anything else if I'm not too sure and I've got the microphone system and can say back to the VAR room or whoever's doing it, that penalty or, you know, that offence, whatever, I need a review. The referee, need a review. And then somebody says, yes, we think you should look at it. Or they say, no, we're happy with your decision. And maybe that doesn't work. I don't know. To be quite honest with you, Simon, I'm past caring. I speak more about VAR. They used to, when I finished refereeing, I used to do what Dermot Gallagher now does for Sky Television. I used to write newspaper articles, and then I'd been out of it that long, I'd walked away from it. In the last 18 months, I've done more media work than ever on the back of VAR because it's become a major talking point. And I just think we're using a sledgehammer to crack eggs here. Or whatever the saying is, nuts, eggs, something. It's making a mess. It's making a mess of the game I love. And I think most of us, whether you're a football fan who can only see things with Cardiff City coloured spectacles on, or whether, you know, whoever you are, our enjoyment of the beautiful game is being spoilt by this absolute farce, inconsistency, re-refereeing, chopping and changing with interpretations. There used to be a time when British referees were deemed as the best in the world. We still produce some excellent referees, but it seems as if when you watch, I'm trying to think which game it was. It was one of the European games last week, and I thought, this referee's not missed a trick. No. The referee was talking to players, controlling the game like used to happen 9 times out of 10 over here. You're never going to change football and football fans. All referees, as I've usually described it, they're the pantomime dame. There's someone to go and boo. There's someone to take your frustrations out on. And the vast majority of football fans in a ground, 99% of them, are there to support one or the other team. They're not there to say, oh, that was a good decision. That was a fair decision. It wasn't. It was against Cardiff City, so it was a wrong decision.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Tribalism. Every set of football fans will always be that way. And this was something that somebody with rose-coloured spectacles thought, well, that'll solve that problem.
Yeah.
No, it won't. It'll never solve that problem because we go to support our team. We don't want to agree with a decision that's against our team. And that'll always be the case. But, the whole point of having a referee is he's an arbiter. He's someone there to make a decision, not to be popular. He has to make what he thinks is right or wrong. And, what's happening now, if I could see positives and think it was helping, yes, on some occasions it does. Where there is match officials are human beings, they will get things wrong, just like centre forwards miss open goals, etc., etc. But the farce at the moment, it shows there's no faith in it, that the Premier League clubs are wanting to have a meeting. And, I know it's driven by certain clubs that feel that they've had more decisions go against them this season. But they wouldn't be calling for that if they didn't think there was something drastically wrong.
Indeed, mate. And I 100% agree with you regarding the European refs, by the way. I think the refereeing in the Champions League this year has been outstanding. And I wonder if that's because the referees in the Premier League and in Scotland, they feel almost like a lack of trust, which results in a lack of belief in their own ability to just do what they've done coming up through the system and just referee football matches, because they feel as if there's always people waiting to undo those decisions. I don't know. It's an interesting one to me. Jeff, to kind of finish off, I've got 2 questions which I want to ask you. So the first one is, has the general standard of refereeing since VAR has been brought in dropped as drastically as it seems to have? Or is it just a case of it's the same discussions, it's just now we're talking about VAR instead of the on-field referees?
I think there's more focus on refereeing decisions now, because every single decision is being dissected and checked. And we're talking about it, it fills column inches, it fills TV programs. Without getting too political and too boring, I think the management of refereeing, since I retired in the period, gradually, the management of refereeing in general has left a lot to be desired. The forward planning, they decided to keep referees on beyond what used to be a statutory retirement age. And we were having referees refereeing out on the Premier League, 54, 55-year-old, still fit enough, very experienced. So there was and were some advantages of having more experienced referees on the list. But what that did was close the door for them to progress younger referees through the system for them to get their chance. Because, I was a referee on the Premier League when Howard Webb was first promoted onto the Premier League. If there hadn't have been a vacancy, he wouldn't have got on. He went on to referee all the major finals, World Cup, Champions League, etc., etc. So that there's been mismanagement, and referees, to keep the clubs happy, they've stopped doing the basics. I touched on it very, very briefly, time wasting. You can imagine, or I can imagine, the bosses saying, look, you don't want cheap cautions, because the clubs don't want lots of cautions, because they're getting players suspended. So they've let time wasting lapse. When a throw-in's taken now, they used to pinch 2 or 3 yards in my day. You've seen them pinching 10 and 15 yards now, and nothing being done about it. The fans going berserk. Now, strong refereeing, setting standards. In the short term, there might be a few yellow cards, there might be a few red cards, but once the standard is set and people know what they can and can't do, behaviour will improve. And there's been a gradual lessening off of some of those silly little aspects of the game. I've seen dissent coming back in, and understandably so. I've not been on a pitch. I don't know what's said nowadays, but you've just had your last 2 decisions overturned by VAR, and you make another decision with no expletives added. I can imagine the players approaching the referee and saying, are you sure? Because you got the last 2 wrong. So, this constant checking and rechecking and everything else, rather than satisfying everybody, it's given the players another stick to beat the referee with, because the dissent, the dissent is born out of frustration. And you can see and listen to my views tonight. I'm more frustrated going to watch a game of football that I love at the highest level than I ever was. And that's why you'll find, I don't know what it's like in South Wales, but I know in the northeast of England, the Newcastles, the Sunderlands, the Middlesbroughs are always going to attract large crowds. But I tell you who is attracting large crowds, and that's non-league football. Yeah. Because it stemmed from COVID, where, you could go to certain games, couldn't go to others, and factor in cost and everything else. But people enjoy the going to a game of football. Yes, you're going to argue the referee, he was offside, he wasn't offside, it was a penalty, it wasn't a penalty, he should have been sent off. That's football, that's what fans do. But you can then go to the pub after the game and have a couple of beers and argue in a friendly manner over that referee cost us, without having to sit there with an hour-long debate on VAR. So it's got to change. No. It's got to change now. Whether this newer scheme they're bringing in about, but getting back to your subject there, Simon, they're talking about bringing this, I don't even know the correct terminology in for it, this new way of spotting offsides, but they're bringing it in after the first international break next season. So we're getting back to the VAR on some grounds in cup competitions, VAR not on others. So we start the league off. We've got one set of laws, rules, interpretations, and then so many weeks in, tell you what, we're going to do something differently. Now, to me, the only time you change anything is in the close season, and then the following season, good, bad, or indifferent, you're stuck with it. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what they do with it, because people are not happy and it's turning people off, Jeff. I've got to be honest. I think it's turning fans off watching football, particularly in grounds. I think more and more people are watching on TV, obviously, whereas technology moves. But I think the VAR aspect is certainly not helping attract people to grounds in the Premier League and things like that. And I also think that, like you mentioned, non-league and things like that, they're probably reaping the benefits of it, because you can, in a lot of these sort of open non-league grounds, you can have a beer while you're watching. You can do all the things you're not allowed to do at a football in the big stadiums. You can have a nice relaxed chat. You can sort of, the referee is the referee, and that's it. You haven't got these delays. Right, Jeff. 2 quick fire questions for you to literally just to finish us off. In your refereeing career, who was the hardest manager to deal with?
Well, the obvious one to throw is Sir Alex. But, I had some fallouts with him, but I had a great deal of admiration for him. Sometimes it's the lesser known names that cause you more problems than enough. I had some run-ins with David O'Leary. Didn't seem as if I could have any banter with him. But the majority of them, you realise the pressure they're under. You realise that it's not personal half the time with any comments that pass. It's just their way of venting the frustrations. And, you can have a bad day. Anybody can have a bad day, and the referees gets the flack. Next time you referee his team, he doesn't want to bear a vendetta or a grudge because he might think decisions will go against him. So I'd like to think, in general, some good days, some bad days, but more or less, managers know the referees that they can trust. Doesn't mean to say they're going to get the decisions in their favour, but they know who the strong referees are. I wonder, it'd be interesting to ask the managers nowadays who they think the strong referees are, because probably the person making the decision is not the man in the middle. They can't criticise him, because if a more senior referee to you, and this has been quoted many times this season, if the senior man is the VAR official and you're a first season Premier League referee, and the senior man says, I think you should have a look at this, let's go away from football. If your boss in the office or the factory or wherever you work wants a word with you and making suggestions that what you've done today at work isn't right, how many people are going to stand up and turn on the boss?
No, of course.
I think that's what we're seeing happening in football. I haven't really answered your question, but, I think on the day, it's usually the biggest clubs that are used to winning. When they don't win, they're the managers are the most angry.
So I can understand that. I can understand that. And this one is it's on the same sort of subject, but it's something I'm really interested in. Like, in your opinion, who is the greatest referee of all time?
Wow. Well, I think, again, that's so difficult to answer, because it's like saying, was George Best better than Gaza, better than Phil Foden? We're talking about different people in different generations.
Who did you look to when you were refereeing? Like, who would you have looked to?
We produced in the past some excellent referees from my area of the country, which acted as role models. George Courtney. Before George Courtney, there'd been excellent referees, in the decades before that. But when I first started refereeing, George Courtney was always a role model. I got on particularly well with Keith Hackett. Similar build to me, and he was the boss. You knew he was the boss. And then, as the generations have gone by, Howard Webb shot to prominence and did exceptionally well. Now he's got the horrendous task of trying to manage the referees at this present level. But we have. This is vast majority of your listeners and viewers will not give a toss who's a good referee or a bad referee, because they paint them all with the same brush. But we have had some, excellent referees. The one that comes to mind and everybody talks about is Kalina, because Kalina refereed in a manner that I think all referees should referee. He should be strong. He should be forceful, not meek and mild. No one argued with Kalina. And I bet if somebody actually looked at mistakes, he made mistakes. He wasn't perfect, and there never, ever will be a perfect footballer or a perfect referee. But I don't think many people were ever going to argue with Kalina, because he just had that sort of persona Don't mess with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Do you know what I find really interesting is all the referees that you've just mentioned there from that sort of era and before. They all had different personalities, and their personalities came through in the way they refereed, the way they, including yourself, the way they spoke to people, the way they spoke to the players, the managers. And I do feel like that seems to almost be lost these days. Like they almost, where you mentioned the FA want them to all be like robots, it feels like they've almost lost that personal touch, I guess.
Football does get, because it's so popular, football carries the can for a lot of things, where football, I think, mirrors life in general, rather than football being the cause of all problems. And I think, social media has changed the way the world has opinions on everything nowadays. The money in the game has changed the way players and managers react. It's changed the way referees act as well, because they're on a very good screw now, and upsetting the wrong people and losing your job. It's not like when, you were a volunteer and got a few quid in expenses. It's a very, very well-paid job now. So there is a little bit of self-preservation. But, the way I refereed and other referees of my generation, the way we spoke at players and with players, that wouldn't be tolerated nowadays. You mic'd up for starters. But I always found with footballers, and I'm quite friendly with a lot of them because, the speaking circuit, I see a lot of them, the media side, a lot of them are still working in the game. And we did have a mutual respect. We did have a rapport. They would know how far they could go. I think nowadays, I wouldn't last 5 minutes. Well, the authorities would sack me because some of the things I used to say with players wouldn't be tolerated. And the players wouldn't have it because we're looking at another generation now. We're looking at a different way. You can't talk to me like that, but a player can scream and effing blind at a referee. The first referee who turns around and tells them to do something, they'll be dismissed. So 100%. It's not just about football. We live in different times now. The game is different. So, to come up with, was George Best, who, Jim Baxter in Scotland was one of my favourites growing up. George Best has got to be a favourite, such a skillful player. I refereed Paul Gascoigne when he was 15, 16-year-old, one of the most precocious talents I've ever been on a football pitch, and had the pleasure of being on a pitch with Cantona, Zola, and all these top players. Was one better than another from a different generation? You don't know. It was different then. Look at the bloody balls that they kick around and head. Very difficult to judge. Was Kevin Howley or Jim Finney a better referee than Michael? I've forgotten his name now. One of the current crop of players of referees. Different times, different generations, different game. And, to sum up the answer to your question there, it's like I was a referee in total for 25 years. When somebody turns around to me in the ground now and says, "Jeff, was that a handball?" My rather crude reply is, "I don't fucking know what a handball is." And, it is a different world now. And, I was at the birthday party of a former footballer on Saturday evening. He's 70-year-old now. Great character. Played down, I don't know where he played in Wales, but he certainly played down in Bristol Rovers and came up to the northeast, played at Middlesbrough. And we often talk about the game now, and everybody's left scratching their head. And the one thing we do talk about, it without any jealousy or anything else, is, the footballers. The guy whose 70th birthday party I was at, he had it in a local working men's club. If the present crop of players, they'll be having it in a marina or on a yacht in wherever. You know, different money,
different
the
worlds.
referees, the game has improved in that respect. The participants are much better rewarded. But as we often say when we have conversations, we had the good times, because nowadays I loved refereeing. I enjoyed being involved in a game that I've loved since I was old enough to walk. But when was the last time you saw a referee on a football pitch looking like he was enjoying it? The smile on his face, talking to the players, having a bit of crack. That's not, that would be accused of, it doesn't matter to you, you don't care, you're unprofessional. It was man management. I had a former player that was a professional footballer, non-league, and then he moved up to the professional game. He's in Australia. He sent me a message. He put something on social media at the weekend of a interchange that him and I had in a Birmingham City versus Wolves game, and the banter that was flying around. We won't be hearing stories like that in the future, because there doesn't appear to be too much respect, doesn't appear to be much banter. And I've always said this: if I'd turned up at a game without my cards and without my whistle, we'd still have a game of football. I could referee that game of football. But if I'd turned up and had lost my voice, I couldn't. Because it was the man management, it was talking to players. Players knew when they were on the last warning. And the game seemed, and I made mistakes. God, your listeners will probably be able to write a book for them. Of course you do, because everyone makes mistakes. The game is so fast, and that's another problem. The game now is so much faster. You know, it used to be played by footballers. Now it's played by athletes. So we talk of different times, but it does leave, I know I sound like somebody's granddad, the good old days. It wasn't perfect, but neither's what I'm watching nowadays. And unfortunately, in my humble opinion, VAR carries a great, or the maybe not VAR itself, but certainly its implementation at the moment is one of the major reasons I think people are angry and not enjoying the game.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to finish this off, Jeff. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could sit here and I could talk to you for another 2 or 3 hours, like easily just talking refereeing and football and the rest of it. But I'm very aware of your time. Tell the people kind of what you're up to at the moment. I know you're doing some speaking events and things like that.
I've been on the after dinner speaking circuit for over 20 years now, telling tales of the good old days predominantly. Some of the things that went on a pitch. So I'm still doing that. I've been down to South Wales on many occasions to do events down there. Been abroad several times, and obviously a lot domestically. I'm a season ticket holder at Ibrox for my sins, so that involves a 400-mile round trip, sometimes twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. I work at Middlesbrough Football Club on match day hospitality in the lounges, and I'm proud to say I'm an ambassador for a local non-league team, where I can go and enjoy Saturdays and midweeks without the problems that we've spent the last hour talking about. So life's for the living. There's always been one consistent factor in my life, and it's been football. As a playing it, not to a very good level, watching it, refereeing it, and now still talking about it, but predominantly watching it, and on some occasions not all that happy with what I'm seeing, and that's not the result. You know, we can after a game of football and I get in the car, you can win, shout and swear, you're not going to change the result. So, you know, the anger of being a 16-year-old wanting to fight the world because my team's lost, those days have long gone. I love the crack. I love the banter, going to football. But we live in a different world now. Even the supporters, everybody, I'm sure it's the same at Cardiff when you get out of the posh seats. Every player that mispasses a ball or does something wrong, they're described with that wonderful descriptive term, the shite. Everybody's shite. Politicians, doctors, dentists, everybody in this world, the present generations wish to use that terminology about them. And I often turn around to fans near me saying, I wish I could have watched you play football. You must have been absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So I keep myself busy, but football has been and always will be very much to the fore of it. I just wish we were watching it without VAR.
Yeah, you and me both, Jeff. Maybe look, Ace Podcast Nation doing some live events at the moment, predominantly with Cardiff, ex-Cardiff players, and we got one with Joe Ledley coming up. I think there's 1 or 2 tickets left. If people want to have a look in the description below, they can get those. But I am interested in branching out into doing some others, so maybe we'll get you guys to South Wales.
Get me down with Andy Campbell. We both speak the same language. And at least the audience will love one half of your speakers.
No, we did. So I did one with Andy just before. He was the first one I did, which made sense because he's a good friend. So for my comfort more than anything, as I kind of branched out into those live events, and it went really well, and we had a great time. So yeah, I think definitely something I will bear in mind, Jeff, because I think. Like we've just spent an hour going back and forth and having a good chat, and I think there's plenty more to come from Jeff Winter. So we'll investigate that. But for the time being, my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me. Apologies again that Rhodri couldn't join us, but we just got to hear a bit more from you. So I guess that's the main thing. Thank you for joining me, Jeff. Cheers, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.